righty. Well, good afternoon. I call the General Academic Instruction Technical and State College Formal Advisory Committee to order. It's 1:02. I can see we're broadcast live through YouTube, and I'll give the normal courtesy notice to silence your phones and stay on mute unless you're planning to speak. Now I guess we'll do roll call. Ms. Gonzalez.
Miss Albright.
Present.
Miss Haskins.
Present.
Dr. Blanchard.
Present.
Miss Brown.
Present.
Miss Deerdorf.
Present.
Mr. Duran. Don't see him on yet. Okay. Miss Elmore.
Present.
Dr. Hurley.
Present.
Miss Kroll. Don't see her on yet either. Miss Salazar.
Present.
And Miss Sloan, she's known absent. She wasn't going to be here today. And Mr. Wooten.
Present.
Okay. So we have a quorum. We're just missing Joseph and Miss Curl. And we'll check back in and see if they add on in a little bit. So
Perfect. Perfect. All right. So now we have the approval of the minutes from the last meeting, September 27th. They were sent out a few days ago, and we'll ask the group if there's any questions, comments, or corrections to the draft minutes. Doesn't look like it. And do we have a motion to approve?
This is Jason. I'll approve. Do a motion to approve.
Perfect. And the second?
This is Wendy. I'll second it.
Awesome. Great. All right. Are there any opposed to approval of the minutes? All right. Hearing none, it passes. Next, we have up the discussion on the charges, and I believe we're going to hopefully cover 1 through 5 today. The first charge is the study and make recommendations of the appropriate funding level for the formulas, for the Comprehensive Regional University Fund, and the research funds as well. Jennifer included the Excel workbook, I believe, in the past. It has a modest growth for FTSC. We're using the revised HEPI calculation 3-year rolling average that Noel brought up and the committee agreed on last time. Infrastructure growth is at 1.1%. And then we plan, or the recommendation is to apply inflation to both instruction, infrastructure, but also the small school supplement as well. Just to keep that moving with inflation. We have the at-risk for the regional, comprehensive regional. So we're going to do inflation. The recommendation is inflation plus a small growth in FTSC 4 degrees awarded. Research, same thought, where we'll update for the estimated 3-year average, or I should say the actual or projected 3-year average, and then put an inflationary calculation. On crew, I should probably also remind the group that the inflation applies both to the rate as well as the base, I believe. Then I guess overall total funding levels increase from the last biennium around 5.6%, so 335 million. That is my brief synopsis, and open it up for the group for discussion.
I think it looks great.
Thanks. I'm sure it will wow the legislature with all the amazing change we're making in our layout. So, all right. Hearing none, the next is charge 2, and it's study and make recommendations for the appropriate funding level for the state colleges. And this is just for the instruction and they call it instructional administrative. And the recommendation for the state colleges is basically just to echo the recommendation for the general academic institutions. So a projection in growth and then happy on the rate. And then as y'all know, they participate in the infrastructure for the general academic institutions. So open that up for any discussion y'all want to have on the state colleges. All right, hearing none. The next is charge 3, and it's study and make recommendations for the Texas State Technical College return value formula. And I'll turn it over to our friend Chad Wooten to add any commentary he'd like on that.
Thanks, Daniel. Yes, we're specifically studying our returned value formula only here in charge 3. For your information, our formula is probably a little foreign to some folks, and so it's been in place about 12 years now, and it basically calculates a percentage of former student earnings in the workplace for 5 years, and that's what funds our formula. It's not based on contact hours or credentials or anything like that. So we track a student in the workforce using Texas Workforce Commission payroll data. Actually, we don't. The coordinating board tracks that data, and that's what funds our formula. The last 3 sessions, our formula has been funded at 35.9%. And so we'll recommend that same percentage again this session. There are 2 refinements that we would like to recommend as well. One is a refinement that was recommended last session that did not get implemented, but we would like to recommend that again, which is to include workforce continuing education programs for students earning 144 contact hours or more into the calculation of our formula. We provide a lot of workforce training that's non-credit, and we're seeing more demand for that from the workforce across the state of Texas. And so we'll make that recommendation to include continuing education funding again. And then the second refinement is to adjust the biennial cohort back 1 year. In this last session, we saw a big swing in the mid-session run from the November run, and it caused a lot of confusion among the legislators and a little bit of a fire drill to explain that. And so this last session, we used the 2016 and 2017 cohort. If we stayed on that path, next session, we would use the 18 and 19 cohort. But the recommendation of a refinement is to change that to 17 and 18 for this next session. So just move that back 1 year. That way we'll know what our formula number is going into the session. It will also eliminate the use of estimates and forecasted data. There's a little bit of a time crunch when our formula is calculated, even in the mid-session run, and we have to estimate the last quarter of wages. And so if we back that up just that 1 year, it'll be a much clearer picture. So the other recommendation, which has been in the TSTC recommendations for a couple of sessions now, is to change our dual credit funding from a sum certain amount to a contact hour formula-based funding. We've made this recommendation. It's just never gotten across the finish line, but currently, in this last session, we received $2.2 million total in some certain amount. So we adjusted, I worked with Jennifer and Emily to calculate an adjustment for inflation up to about 2.4 million, and then backed into a recommended rate of $10.58 a credit hour for dual credit. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, so the first half, the recommendation is basically just to try moving y'all from an estimated number to an actual number. So, and it'll be a one-time change, and y'all are estimated over actual, even though the data is going to be a little bit more delayed.
Yeah, it'll back it up just a little bit, and as you can tell, our formula works in arrears. It takes 7 years because a former student works in the actual workforce for 5 years, and we track those actual wages. So we're living in the past as it is, but to get that 1 year back, it eliminates that big adjustment that we saw this session. And even apples to apples, we saw a $4 million difference between the estimates and forecasts versus the actuals. So I think the actuals make sense in this case.
Seems from a policy perspective to make sense, and if your administration's happy with that, I don't personally have any heartburn on it. I don't know if my colleagues do. I'm going to guess they don't. So, and then the other one's on dual credit, and I'm gonna, unless someone indicates that they have any heartburn on the dual credit recommendation, I can't think of anything intelligent to say in opposition of it. So,
Yeah, can you repeat the dual credit recommendation? I'm sorry.
It is to change from a some certain amount in the bill pattern to a contact hour formula. We're trying to get into the contact hour formula funding for dual credit. We've recommended it. Emily, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's been 2 or 3 sessions now. So we're taking our some certain amount of 2.2 million, adjusting for inflation, and then backing into a contact hour rate based on the estimates.
I'm just excited for you, Chad, that you've been fighting for three bienniums.
I know one of these sessions we're going to get there. We're not giving up.
Yeah. I have no heartburn about it from my perspective. So, all right. Well, hearing none with that, thanks, Chad. And we'll move to charge 4. And this is a recommendation on formula inputs. So the expenditure study and the tuition estimate. And our good friend Joseph Duran made it out of the waiting room. So we'll turn it over to him.
Hey, thanks, Daniel. Can you hear me okay? Okay, good. So appreciate whoever let me in, but I was trying to get in, just couldn't get in. So with regard, the subcommittee met on October the 24th at 10 o'clock, and all the committee members were in attendance. I'll just let you know our next meeting is going to be the week of November 13th. We don't have it. I think we were waiting on some responses from a couple of people to set the date, but that'll be before our final Formula Advisory Committee meeting. Where we are, there were 2. Our charge was to look at the different formula inputs, and so the 2 that we landed on were how we actually how the LBB calculates the GRD for the academics, and we also are looking at the matrix weights and looking at the causes for the different shifts in the weights. So I'll start with the GRD estimate and what our recommendation as a subcommittee on that. I think we're ready to make that recommendation. But what we did was Emily Cormier provided us some numbers looking at FY22 actual E&G tuition numbers. And so we looked at using that times 2 and the impact it would have. And so obviously there are some shifts in the actual formula amounts and the general revenue amounts, but not necessarily, we know that's going to happen. Okay. But the difference in the overall formula was a reduction in GRD revenue estimates of like 34.6 million. So with that, the impact on the I&O rate, the original rate was $59.08. Well, by using the estimated GRD, not estimated, but using the actual GRD numbers, it lowered the rate to $58.71. And that's a result of the 35 million less in GRD money that was in the I&O and infrastructure formula. Overall, obviously it didn't impact the amount of general revenue that was in there, but just the GRD number. The infrastructure, the impact was the original rate was the current rate was $5.54, and it lowered it just a tad to $5.51. So as a subcommittee, we agreed that, we don't want to, the thought is we want to make it our recommendation to be, number one, something that brings us in line with the way the HRIs or GRD estimates are calculated. And it also, I think, it provides a more, what I've written here, just kind of a simple, straightforward, a more predictable methodology. So it would be based on what members put in their LAR for their in their schedule. I think Schedule 1A. So looking forward to the next biennium, the critical calculation would be the FY24 tuition estimates that are put in the Schedule 1A. So folks that are out there on our committee, correct me here if I'm wrong, but I think where we landed was that we would want to make a recommendation to the whole committee as to changing the way that the estimated, change the way the GRD numbers are used in the formula, moving from an estimated amount to actual numbers based on previous years. So any comments on that from our group?
I would be ecstatic if you can get that across the finish line. So,
Okay. Well,
yeah.
Well, that's where we are with that. With the next charge, we were looking at the overall. It's a 3-year average of the cost study that determines the weights for each of our programs, and the key driver in all the weights is lower level liberal arts. And so the thought is that we didn't want to see the cost of the lower level liberal arts driving down the cost weights of our other programs. And when you look historically, and I was just kind of glancing at some of these numbers, the cost per SCH for lower level liberal arts has increased significantly over the years. I didn't look at each one of them, but for example, since 2010, the current lower level engineering has actually gone down since then. But so one of the, we're going to pick this one up back in the week of November 13th. And I think where we're going to land is maybe making a recommendation on coming up with a base amount for that lower level liberal arts amount, and maybe having that static. And I know Emily Deerdorf has worked on that or has done some analysis on that. So Emily, do you want to share anything with the group?
Sure. So, we've talked a lot in this committee for years, and the legislature has talked about compression of matrix weights being a problem where whenever the legislature is maintaining our rates for the I&O, any kind of growth in expenditures and lower level liberal arts is not being accounted for, since that way it always remains a 1. And so the idea would be to set a base expenditure rate so that when we see those increases in expenditures for lower level liberal arts and all the other disciplines for that matter, the weights more accurately reflect those cost increases. So as we see things like inflation impacting our costs, we can actually get some of that funding realized if the legislature chooses to maintain rates in the INO. So that's the concept. We think this could help stop the bleeding as far as this compression, especially because over the last 3 years, we've seen the cost of lower level liberal arts increase dramatically. And so if that keeps happening, compression is likely to just get worse and worse.
Yeah, I looked at, Jennifer provided me with some historical costs. So when I looked at since 2010 to current, lower level liberal arts, the cost per STH has gone up like 27%. Lower level engineering has actually gone down by 9%. So our hope is that at our next meeting that we'll have a recommendation that we can bring back to I think we're meeting again on December 6th. So that is our goal. So Daniel, that's kind of, I think, where we're at.
Great. No, I mean, if when y'all can figure out a way to get a floating one in the matrix, I will be even more ecstatic. So, all right. So next charge up is charge 5, and that's our co-charge with the health-related institutions. And Ms. Deerdorf is, I think, the chair of that working group, and turn it over to her to discuss.
All right. So we have been working on this charge looking at health programs that are taught both at general academic and health related institutions and the funding disparities between the two. And so over the course of our meetings, our subcommittee has come up with a recommendation following those same principles that I think I discussed at the last meeting, where this would be a recommendation that would be new funding outside and on top of the existing INO formula, so that it would not compromise the integrity of either the general academic INO formula or the health related institution INO formula, because we don't want to recommend anything to support these programs at the expense of all the other programs that our institutions offer. So that was the larger principle. And so the recommendation that we've developed would be we're calling it a healthcare workforce program supplement. And the idea would be that this would be supplemental funding to provide the additional funding between what these programs are funded in the general academic formula with the funding that those programs would have generated in the health related institution formula. So it bridges the gap between the two formulas. And so the programs that we landed on that would be included in the supplement are nursing and pharmacy at all program levels, as well as health services programs at the terminal degree level. So the doctoral and professional practice level, as well as the master in physician assistants. And so looking at that, Jennifer's run numbers for us and looking at those zip codes, pulling all of that data. If you looked at the current weighted semester credit hours with the 2024 or 2024-25 rates, you'll see that the breakdown in funding on the screen, and altogether the recommendation would be about $251 million, most of that driven by nursing, just because of the scope and size of nursing programs at our general academic institutions. Moving forward, these numbers, wouldn't be a fixed number. It would be adjusted depending on the funding decision, the rates in the health related and the general academic INO formulas, as well as the weights in the general academic INO formula, since those, as we know, shift, whereas the health related institution weights are set. So we have shared this with the health related institution subcommittee that has this charge as well, as it is a joint charge. And they told us that they are supportive of the concept. They're looking specifically at the language, seeing if there's any additional tweaks they'd like to do, but seem to be on board. They promised they wouldn't undercut us, I think was the word in their report. So I feel like that's a win. So I think we're all on board in concept. We're just trying to hammer out the details. And then I think we'll be good to go for recommendations for the report.
Great, good work. Any questions, comments on the Charge 4, Charge 5 update? All right, hearing none. Jennifer, question for you. On drafting this report, would it help if we had a motion to adopt the recommendations for Charge 1 through 3 so that we can proceed with drafting, or do you prefer for us to get the final recommendations on 4 and 5 and do one vote then?
I think you could just wait and do one vote then, if y'all wanted to work on the pieces together for the report, but I defer to you. You can handle it how you prefer.
I'm here to keep you happy, so. All right, so if there's no more discussion, we won't do a vote. Our next meeting is December 6th at 1 p.m. And again, if you have anything you would like for that meeting, just to let Jennifer know and she'll produce it and distribute it. And from there, it's time to adjourn. And do we have a motion and a second to adjourn?
So moved.
All right, with Susan Brown and Joseph Duran on that. And any opposed? Hearing none, we'll be back December 6th, 1 p.m. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.